Okay, so how did you get on in the rock, paper, scissors project? Hopefully it went smoothly. If it didn't and you got stuck in any places, not to worry. Let's see if we can code it up together now and get a working solution. So the first thing we're going to do is import a useful function and a useful library that will help us in creating the game. So firstly, we're going to import the clear output function, which we know is from ipython.display, and this will just help us keep a clean program at the end when displaying the information to the user. So we can put from ipython.display import clear underscore output. Secondly, because we know we need the computer to generate a randomly selected item from either rock, paper, or scissors, we're going to import the random module. Okay, so with the imports now complete, let's dive straight into creating the game logic. Firstly, we're asked to create a function that obtains the user's input. So we know to create a function we need to put the keyword def, so we'll put def, and then we'll call this function get underscore user underscore selection, and then we'll put parentheses with a colon. Now the first thing I'm going to put within this function are the items that a user can select from. Now because we know they can only choose between rock, paper or scissors, we're going to set a variable called choices, and inside this variable we're going to store a tuple, i.e. an immutable object with the items rock, paper and scissors. I'm then going to set a variable called user underscore input and set this to an empty string. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I'm now going to create a while loop that just checks to see if the user input variable that we've set above is not in choices. So I'll put while user underscore input is not in choices, i.e. when it doesn't equal rock, paper or scissors, then we want to keep asking the user for input. So I'll then put user underscore input as the variable and set this equal to the input function that asks the user to enter a choice. We'll then put in brackets rock, paper, scissors, and then we'll put a colon. Now after this input function, you may have noticed that in choices I've started each item with a capital letter. Now because we're comparing this user input to what is in choices, I'm therefore going to capitalize whatever the user puts in. Therefore if they put the whole word in capital letters or the whole word in lowercase, it will convert it to a capitalized version of the word and it should therefore equal choices. After this user underscore input definition, I'm going to put the keyword continue. Therefore, if a user was to put the word hello, we would then continue back up to the while loop. Now user input now contains hello, it's still not in choices and therefore we're going to get asked for user input again. If the user input is rock, we then go back up to the while loop. User input is now in choices, so the not in choices evaluates to false, and therefore we're going to then return the user underscore input, which in this example would have been rock. So we've now defined a function that can obtain a user's input. Okay, so moving on to the second task. We're asked to create a function that generates a randomly selected choice for the computer. So once again, we're going to start by defining a function, so we'll put def, and the name I'll provide this function is computer underscore generated underscore selection. I can then put parentheses and a colon. In a similar way to what I did in the first example, I'm first of all going to set a variable called choices, and then I'm going to create a list of items that the computer can select from, so we know this is going to be rock, paper, and scissors. And after this line, I'm going to create a variable called computer underscore selection, which will just store the computer selection. And I'm going to set this equal to a call from the random library. And I'm going to call upon the method known as choice. So I'm going to put random.choice, and inside the parentheses, I'm going to pass in what items we want the choice to be made from. And in this example, we know we want to pass in the variable choices. And if you needed help to understand what the choice method would do, As a reminder, you can press Shift and Tab and it will provide you some documentation. So here you can see that the method choice is asking for one parameter called sequence. And it tells us that this method will choose a random element from a non-empty sequence. Well, we have a sequence defined above called choices, which is simply a list. We can see that it's non-empty because it's populated, and therefore we'll get a choice from one of these three items. The final thing we need to do is return the computer's selection, so we need to return the variable computer_selection. Okay, so that's the second task complete, but let's just test to see if the computer-generated selection function is working as we expect. So let's call upon it to see what we get back. You can see that when I call upon computer-generated selection and then press return, we get paper returned. And if I go back up and run the function again, we get scissors returned. If I run it again, we get scissors once again. A fourth time, we get paper. Let's run it until we get rock. There you go, on the next time we run it, we get rock. So you can see that the computer is generating a randomly selected item from the list of choices. Okay, so moving on to the third task. We're asked to determine a winner for each round and keep track of the score. So in order to do this, I'm going to create a function that deals with both the conditional statement, so to determine who the winner is, and also keeping track of the score. So firstly, I'm going to define a function called determine_winner. And inside this function, I'm going to want to pass in two parameters. So this function will always expect two pieces of information. Can you guess what this is? Well, my thinking is that because we need to compare the player choice and the computer choice together, I'm going to want to pass in these two bits of information into the function. So I'm going to create a parameter called player_choice, and I'm also going to create a parameter called computer_choice. These will be the only parameters that I include, and I'm going to therefore put a colon after this function header. Now we know we also need to keep track of the score, and we haven't seen this in an example yet, so I'm going to implement this in a slightly different way. My expectation is that when I get to the very last step and produce a working game, I'm going to create a variable called player_score, and I'm going to set that equal to 0 to begin with. I'm also going to create a variable called computer_score, which can store the amount of points the computer gets. But in order to access these two variables that I'm going to define outside of the function, and bearing in mind I want to change these variables, I'm going to precede these two variables with the keyword global. And we saw the keyword global when we discussed scope. So I'm going to put global and then player_score, and then I'm going to put global computer_score. Now whenever I reference or change the values that are stored in these variables, it will change what is stored in the global variable. In other words, a variable that can be accessed anywhere in your code. Okay, so we can now move on to determining the winner of each round. And the way I'm going to do this is by simply putting in place some conditional statements that checks to see what's stored in player choice versus what's stored in computer choice, and then we will print a message to the screen that tells the user who won that round, and we also then need to change the value that's stored in either player_score or computer_score in order to update the scores accordingly. Now the first thing I'm going to do is firstly see if player_choice is equal to computer_choice. Now, if player_choice is the same as computer_choice, we know that it's a draw. They've both selected the same item. So we can therefore print both players selected curly braces. We can then put a full stop, and then we can put it's a draw. We'll then use the format method and we can pass in either player_choice or computer_choice. So let's just pass in player_choice. Now this will actually cover 3 eventualities. For example, if player choice and computer choice both are rock, then it's a draw. If they're both scissors, then it's a draw. And if it's paper, then it's a draw. So there are 3 combinations here that will always result in a draw. So it's good to put this line of code first so you don't have to write them out individually later on. So with the event of a draw now covered, we can then put our second conditional statement. So we'll put elif player underscore choice is equal to rock. Now notice here that rock is with a capital R, and that's because we actually capitalized the word when we created the get user selection function. Now if the player underscore choice is equal to rock, well the computer choice could be one of 2. It can be either scissors or paper. We've already dealt with the situation where the computer choice would be rock in the statement above. So we need to have a nested if statement. So after rock we can put a colon, and then we can put if computer underscore choice is equal to scissors, and then we can put a colon. So at this point we know that computer choice would be scissors and player choice would be rock. Well, rock smashes scissors, and therefore the person who picked rock would win. So because the players picked rock, we can print rock smashes scissors, you win. And then after this print statement, we want to change the value that's stored in the variable called player underscore score, which we know we're going to define later. So we'll put player underscore score, and then we're going to plus equals 1. Now inside this nested if statement, we also need to put an else clause. And the else clause will capture the event where the computer underscore choice is equal to paper. So we can put else, then a colon, and we'll then put print paper covers rock, because the computer choice is paper and the player choice is rock, and then we have to put you lose, because the player would lose in this instance. And at this point, we'd want to update the computer score variable and increment it by 1. We've then finished this conditional statement, so we can go back out to the outer if statement and then cover the other possible scenarios. So we'll put elif player underscore choice is equal to paper, we'll then put a colon, we'll then create a nested if statement, and we'll put if computer underscore choice is equal to rock. In this event, paper covers rock, so we can print paper covers rock, you win. After this, because the player wins, we'll want to increase the player's score by 1, so we'll put player underscore score plus equals 1. Now if the computer choice was actually scissors, we can put else and then print scissors cuts paper, you lose. And then we need to increment what's stored in the computer underscore score variable by 1. And finally, the last possible outcome we could have is where player underscore choice is equal to scissors. Now if player choice is scissors, then we need a nested if statement to check what the computer's picked. So we can put if computer underscore choice equals paper, then we can print scissors cuts paper, you win, and then increment player score by 1. We can then put an else statement where it captures where computer choice is rock. We can then put rock smashes scissors, you lose. And then we can increment what's stored in the computer underscore score by 1. Now at this point, the function is complete. But we can't call upon this function yet because there are some variables inside this function that we haven't created. For example, player underscore score and computer underscore score. So we'll pause on this function for now and see if it's working when we get to the end. Okay, so moving on to the fourth task, we need to create a function that checks to see if the user wants to play the game again. And we've seen this before, so we can quickly go through this with hopefully very little issues. So we'll create a function called play underscore again, and then we're going to set a variable called replay and have this set equal to the function input with the message, would you like to play again? With some guidance that we want to either receive a Y or an N, so we'll put brackets Y /N and then a colon. We then need to check what they've put in, so we'll go if replay.lower, so we'll convert whatever they put in to a lowercase letter, and then a set of parentheses is equal to the lowercase y, then we want to return true, because the user has stipulated that they do want to play again. If they haven't put a y, we'll then put else and we'll return false. Now this could be implemented better, because if you think about the risks that could arise here, if a user put nothing or a z or an n or a p, whatever the value they put, it's going to return false. But for now, because we're just trying to get a game that works and we have provided them some guidance as to what we want to see, we'll just put else and then we'll return false. And this function should work accordingly. Okay, so we're now at the point where we need to create a working game using the functions that we've created above. So we just need to make sure that we're setting variables and calling the functions in the correct order in order to make this game function. Now you may recall that earlier I mentioned that when we created the determine_winner function, that I wanted to set two variables in the global scope, outside of the function and also outside of the while loop. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. The two variables that I created were called player_score, so I'll put player_score and set this equal to a score of 0 to begin with. And I'll also do the same for the computer's score, so I'll put computer_score and set this to an initial value of 0. I will then create the while loop. So I'm going to put while true and then a colon. So if you think about this, the only way that we can break out of this loop, considering that true is always equal to true, is if we break out of the while loop with the break statement. So to start with, I just want to welcome the player to the game. So I'm going to print a message that says, "Welcome to the rock, paper, scissors arena." I'm then going to, straight after this welcome message, print out the current score. So I'm going to print "the current score is" with a colon, and then on a new line I'm going to print "player" with curly braces. Then I'm going to put the pipe symbol. I'm then going to put another set of curly braces, and then I'm going to put "computer." And this reads very similar to how it would if you were watching a sport event. I'm then going to use the format method, and inside the brackets, the first curly braces are going to contain what is stored in player_score variable. I can then put a comma, and the second set of braces are going to be inputted with what's stored in the computer_score variable. Okay, so at this point, we're just printing some statements to the screen. Now, inside of our determine_winner function, we've included two parameters. So we're expected to get a player choice and a computer choice. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually get a variable which stores a value for these selections. So I'll start by creating a variable called player_choice, and I'm going to set this equal to a call on the getUserSelection. So when the while loop gets down to this line of code, the user is going to be asked for their selection. And when they're put in a valid selection, it will get stored in a variable called player_choice. Great. So now let's do the same for the computer choice. I'm going to create a variable called computer_choice, and I'm going to set this equal to a call on the computer_generated_selection function. So this will therefore store a randomly selected item from rock, paper or scissors and store it inside the computer_choice variable. Now at this point, I've got two pieces of information and I've got some print statements that are displaying some information to the screen. But I'm actually going to clear what's stored on the screen by using the clear_output function, which we know is Jupyter specific, just to keep it clean. And after it's been cleared, I want to print a statement to the screen, which tells the user what they've chosen versus what the computer chose. So I'm going to print "you chose" and then curly braces. I'll then put a comma. I'll then put "computer chose" and then curly braces. And then I can use the format method and place player underscore choice in the first set of braces, and then I'll put computer underscore choice in the second. Now at this point, all we've done is tell the user what they've selected and also what the computer has selected. But we haven't actually determined who has won the round. So we need to call upon our determine underscore winner function. And we know that this function takes in two arguments. One that relates to player choice and one that relates to computer underscore choice. Now we've called them the same thing here, so we can actually pass in our variables called player underscore choice as the first argument, and we'll pass in computer underscore choice as the second. This function will then be run, and we're going to compare the two values based on our conditional statements that we had written above. Now after it's determined the winner, we need to obviously display who has won and what the score is. So we can print to the screen the current score is, and then we can put the same line of code that we put above. Now theoretically we could have put this in a function so we're not repeating ourselves, but for the purposes of this example, let's just copy and paste the code again. Now the determine underscore winner function actually updates the score as well. So where we're calling and printing the player score and computer score for a second time in this while loop, we would have expected the winner's score to be updated by 1. And at this point, the round is over. We've already compared the values, we've already seen who's won, so we need to check to see if the user wants to play again. So what we can do is put if not play underscore again. And the only way that this will evaluate to true is if a user doesn't want to play again, because if they don't want to play again, we'll return false. The opposite of false is true, and therefore, when a user doesn't want to play again, we want to clear the output, so we'll call upon the clear underscore output function, and then we will print hope to see you soon. After this line, we're going to break out of the while loop, because they don't want to play again. Now, if the user does want to play again, they'll put y. Y returns true in the play underscore again function. The opposite of true is false, and therefore the if statement's code block will not be executed, and therefore we don't break out of this loop. But what we do want to do after they've decided whether they want to play again is clear underscore output, because the first thing that's going to happen when we go back up to the top of the while loop is we print out welcome to the rock paper scissors arena, the current score is, and it will then display the current score after the first round has been played. Okay, so we're now at the point where we can test our game. Let's see if the game functions and operates as we would expect. And the way we're going to do this is by going up to kernel, and then we're going to click on restart and run all. This will run all the cells that we've written so far, and we'll see how the while loop then performs. Okay, so you can see that when we get down to the while loop, we're presented with the message, welcome to the rock, paper, scissors arena. The current score is 0-0. Enter a choice, rock, paper, or scissors. So let's play the computer at a game, and we'll say that the first person to 3 wins. So I'm going to start by entering rock. Yes, rock smashes scissors, you win. The current score is player 1, computer 0. So it's working as we expect. The player did win, and hence the player's score has incremented by 1, and we're then asked if we want to play again. Let's put a capital Y. Great, so welcome to the rock, paper, scissors arena. The current score is 1-0. Enter a choice. Okay, this time I'm going to go with paper. Ooh, the computer also selected paper. It's a draw. Would you like to play again? Yes. This time, let's go with scissors. Ah, rock smashes scissors. The computer chose rock, therefore the player loses. The current score is 1-1. Would you like to play again? Yes. This time I'm going to go rock. It seemed to be lucky the first time. Ooh, they also selected rock. Let's go rock again. Ah, the computer chose paper. We lose. The current score is player 1, computer 2. Would you like to play again? Yes. Let's go with scissors. Ooh, the computer went paper. It's 2-2. First one to 3 wins. Would you like to play again? Yes. Let's go with paper. How lucky. Computer chose rock. Paper covers rock. You win. The current score is player 3, computer 2. Great stuff. Would you like to play again? Let's put N because we don't want to go any further. And then we're presented with the message, hope to see you soon. Great. So we've managed to create a very easy rock, paper, scissors game, which is actually quite engaging with very few functions and a very small while loop. But hopefully you're now starting to get to grips with how we can present information to the screen, how we can create functions and call upon them, how we can store information in variables, and all the other features that we've learned throughout the course so far. All of these mini projects are a great way to try to solidify the knowledge that you're picking up throughout the course. If there's any part of this project that you didn't understand, please make sure you get in touch because it's so important that you understand the language first and foremost. We will make sure we get your understanding back on track so that you're not lost in subsequent parts of the course. I hope you enjoyed that project. See you in the next one.